Hello or namaste. Welcome to Atypical Dikkate, a conversation podcast. I'm your host Soumya, and in this podcast, I talk to fellow queer, neurodivergent, and disabled folks. This podcast is not just a repository of stories and experiences, but it is also a journey to build solidarity, queer intimacy, and a community while highlighting neglected issues including sexual and reproductive health and rights. Today, I have Vinita with me. Vinita is a Bahujan queer feminist researcher with a specialization in sexual and reproductive health and rights. Her work within feminist movement spaces centers around abortion rights, particularly through the lenses of queer and anti-caste narratives. Vinita has spearheaded research projects that document the barriers marginalized communities face in accessing abortion services in Kerala and Assam, initiatives that have successfully led to youth-driven advocacy in these regions. Last year, she collaborated with the Center for Reproductive Rights on a regional study examining queer and trans people's access to abortion across South Asia. She is currently engaged as a consultant with SAGE, Safe Abortion Advocacy Initiative Global South Engagement, a network hosted by Arrow, and also serves as a program advisor for Common Health, a pan-India coalition working to advance access to maternal health, reproductive rights, and safe abortion. Vinita is a committed advocate for meaningful youth participation in SRHR, championing evidence-based research and community-driven advocacy to advance justice and equity in reproductive health. Hello Vinita, thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me.
No, thank you so much. It's a pleasure for being here, and I think there are hardly spaces that is interested to speak about this intersection of queer rights, abortion, and disability. So I am more than happy to be here.
Likewise, Vinita, you have done a lot of extensive work in the field of SRHR, and I'll dive right into it. So, Vinita, let's start with something we often hear in mainstream conversations, that abortion is either completely legal in India or completely illegal. Could you help us decode the actual legal landscape? What does the MTP Act allow? And does having a law translate to access on the ground?
Yeah, thanks, Soumya. And you're absolutely right. In my conversation, I get to know that either people believe that it is illegal, and it also stems from the understanding that it is a sin, and abortion is always equated as a murder or something, an association of criminality. And we also live in a heteropatriarchal setup. So in that context, people believe that abortion is illegal. And I've also come across, I think it was especially highlighted when the Roe v. Wade case got repealed. And in Twitter, we saw a lot of people chest thumping about how progressive our abortion laws are. And in fact, people saying that it is a right. So in that context, people believe that it is a right, and there are people who believe that it is illegal. But abortion in India is legalized under certain conditions, and it has been legalized since 1971, like you said, under the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act. And there were further amendments post 1971, and so basically, abortion is allowed till 24 weeks under certain conditions, which means it's conditional, so it's not a right in India. And those grounds also include grave risk to the physical or mental health of a woman. Woman is, I'm quoting how the law says, under actual or foreseeable environment, as when pregnancy is a result of contraceptive failure or on humanitarian grounds, or if pregnancy results from a sex crime such as rape, incest, or if a minor is involved, or someone from or a person with mental disability, or on eugenics ground where there is a reason to suspect that it would be a substantial risk if the child is born. And beyond 24 weeks, a medical board is set up that comprises with gynecologist, a pediatrician, and a radiologist. So whatever the law says, it's not actually under medical terms. It's actually under some moral or socially acceptable codes that how our laws are also formed. And when you also look at it, it's also eugenics, and it doesn't include abortion seekers who are diverse. say queer and trans people who also access abortion, and it also gives like an impression of who an acceptable abortion seeker is, which is also almost very victimized in sense of especially if the person, if it implies that a person is outside the marital realm, or if it's a queer person, like it's almost like unimaginable when you read the law. So yeah, and it also creates an idea of what a desirable citizen would be when it says that like abortion would be allowed under certain eugenic condition, which means like if it's a disabled child or a child born out of rape or incest. So it creates a narrative about who a desired citizen in a modern caste India would be. And we can also go back and see why this law was also brought up. And in that sense, like abortion continues to be criminal under the Indian Penal Code, which we inherited from the British Penal Code. And under that, so anyone who provides abortion or who seeks abortion is penalized. So what was also happening post independence, a lot of women who were still seeking abortion, and they were seeking abortion then again under unsafe conditions, right? They were seeking unsafe abortion primarily. And like a lot of rising numbers of these women who were dying from unsafe abortion came into picture, and doctors would frequently come into notice about women who have grave health issues because of unsafe abortion, because they sought abortion from an unskilled practitioner, because doctors would be penalized if they provide abortion. So it was also from the lens of population control that these laws were also brought. A committee was set up to understand like the status of abortion under in India, and so post so then so it was Shantilal committee was set up to gather evidence, and it was a set of doctors and NGO and feminists who then produced evidence and argued on liberalization of abortion law. And even a law, like when we hear medical termination of pregnancy, it's also like very like strategically put to protect from backlash from the which is like from the religious institution or social setting, and it was created. And at that point of time, like the argument was also centered around from this Malthusian logic around that there's a crisis of overpopulation in India that we are facing. So a lot of family planning was centered around population control, and abortion would provide a certain solution to this. And so apart from like quantity of population, they were also arguing around the quality of population, which then was brought in by these eugenic settings about that it would be unfair for a woman to bring a disabled child, and it's a liability for the woman to bring a disabled child or for the society itself, which is a huge disservice when we create laws that are not rights based and that sets apart a certain population, and rather like our laws should be centered around bodily autonomy and agency of a pregnant person. So over the time, TP has been criticized by feminists, and that it's not a rights-based framework. It's ableist and like it's provider-centric, and it's also to protect like providers rather than like someone who seeks abortion. So that is the entire context of why the law was set up. And like coming to the picture of to the present, of course, like having a law doesn't mean availability, like accessibility. So, like, we also have statistics that, like, even today, unsafe abortion contributes to the maternal mortality rate. It's actually like one third of the maternal mortality rate, and at least 8 women die as a result of unsafe abortion. And it's completely preventable. So that is the like situation today, and we know like how much stigmatized abortion is. Like even when we like there are hardly spaces where we can talk about abortion with some sense of and there is also like a lot of shame associated when we speak about abortion, even in news or in portrayal of media. We all often see whoever seeks abortion in films is like villainized. And even in fact today I was speaking with someone like who was sharing, and like we were remembering like this one Malayalam movie where an aborted fetus came back as a ghost to haunt. the couple. So these are like very horrific depiction of found abortion. So it's extremely stigmatized topic in India, and which makes it extremely difficult to access also.
It's a fetus, like you said. That is the crux that people, feminists, try to engage with, but anti-choice narratives and everything is like they are hijacking the rights-based, not even rights-based, the language of like justice, and then flipping the narrative to put the onus on the person who is pregnant, basically. And while you were talking about Roe versus Wade, I was randomly scrolling Instagram one day and I came across a reel how a group of young women actually came together to do these abortions, because abortion was not a legal right in US. They used to have these secret spots, and then they had codified language where they would meet and help each other. I think the number was 21 if I'm not mistaken, but later on they were like obviously penalized. They were taken to court and they were sentenced to some sort of like punishment, life imprisonment or like couple of years. I can't remember exactly, but I remember seeing that reel. And then the Roe versus Wade thing happened, and then the punishment was scraped off. But now things have changed again. You briefly touched upon the stigma, the challenges, and I would love to know more, like what are some of these specific challenges that young people and adolescents face when trying to access abortion services, especially in terms of like stigma, consent, confidentiality. Does it like intersect with any other laws in the Indian context?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, if you ask who an ideal abortion seeker is, honestly, there is no ideal abortion seeker. Like, everyone would be heavily criticized for that. But like, still an acceptable abortion seeker in the health system, how it operates, is a cis, upper caste, elite married woman, if we imagine, who also has a supportive husband and a family, and who in fact had a child previously, so it's all right to abort the about this pregnancy. So these are like certain acceptable or privileges to access abortion. So if you add like certain layers to it, like then it will make it more and more hard. So if you are unmarried, if you don't have financial security, or say if you come from certain caste, or are a queer or a trans person, then like these layers like make it more and more difficult. And health system of course like favors like operates like in a very hetero patriarchal way, where you need an approval of your partner, and it's also looked down upon, or it's very difficult if you're an pregnant person who is going to the health facility alone without a male presence. So it's very difficult to access these services. And even though like the law says that if you are above 18, only the consent of the pregnant person is required, not consent of the spouse. If you're a minor, and or a person with mental disability, then the consent of the guardian is asked. But like when it comes to, so because of these setups, if for example, if an adolescent has to seek services, then often the case is like that they would mask their identity, and they would have markers of marriage, or have a male friend to accompany them in order to get the services. And there is also a conflation of the POXO Act, that if you are an adolescent and the doctor, because like adolescent sexuality is criminalized, then the doctor would is have to mandatorily report it. So in order to avoid like this hassle of to engage with the police and state, they deny services. And then the what it also means for adolescents, like more like it's even harder, because some of the cases are also like adolescents are survivors of sexual assault, and the perpetrators are decision makers or the guardian and parent. And I remember this one case when I was also doing research in Assam, where this adolescent who was assaulted by the stepfather, and it was an ASHA worker who interfered and tried to help this person for abortion. But it was so stigmatized. It was like it was she was then ostracized for being pregnant, that then it pushed to this adolescent to taking her life. So this is the condition like that the youth and adolescents have to face. And like health system is so extremely discriminatory that a lot of doctors deny abortion. And it also stems from their own biases that around caste or gender and sexuality. Like I can also give you like another instance where in Kerala, the community, so it's a Latin Catholic community and they are also like caste minority. And it also have historically faced a lot of discrimination from the health system. So the doctors deny abortion on the grounds of stereotyping these women by saying that they are sexually promiscuous and they have children, like 3 to 4 children. So we are denying like abortion, or they like manipulate them by saying that your religion like doesn't allow you to, it's a sin in your religion, so you shouldn't go through abortion. So a young person in these setup, like it's very hard to get support. And also as a young person, likely you don't have money to access these services, which is a huge like barrier to enter into health system and see things, or like even to travel, right? Or if you, or to have like certain mobility, you're navigating within the house where there's a father, there's a mother, you have to navigating like hiding pregnancy from them and contacting someone like to have support in order to travel to finding this non-judgmental doctor who would help you out. And if you come from a small town or village, it's even more hard because it's such a close knit society. Like if the that then the young person would likely not go to a government hospital because their privacy would be under threat. So then they would have to likely travel like far away places, which means like more money, which means like you should have some level of mobility. So all of them becomes like more and more difficult for them. And so what it means, because of all of these layers, like likely young people are pushed towards unsafe abortion, and that is the reality. They are pushed towards unsafe abortion. And because like we lack spaces as young person to actually have like rights based or factual non-judgment information, they would like we would be more susceptible to misinformation. So they would try unsafe practices based on hearsay, like they would consume a lot of alcohol or large amount of pepper, or push twigs with poison, and which again put them under risk. And or they go to traditional healers or unskilled practitioners, which again would be which would put them in health crisis. And also because adolescents, especially and young people, we don't have that much access to like comprehensive sexuality education. Then we are not also aware about our body, sex or rights. Then a lot of adolescents also come to know about their pregnancy at the later stage. So then it's more difficult to access these services. And even though like we have like these programs, RKSK or like an adolescent health facility clinics, all of this exists, but on ground, like it's way more hard to access these services. It's as an adolescent and as a young person, it's far more difficult to access these services.
You briefly touched, not briefly actually, you explained at length why seeking abortion care is difficult. But there are also some more myths, like you mentioned the POXO thing, right? There are such conflations with other kinds of laws like PCPNDT, which is why people also don't seek abortion. There are these narratives and they end up harming vulnerable people the most. So, can you just shed a little bit of light on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And like it also stems from the idea that like that the conflations happen because there's a belief that people are seeking abortion because they want to eliminate female fetuses, like it's a sex selective abortion. But then what PCP and DT, Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Technique Act says is it prohibits sex determination. So if you determine sex and if you get, so that is prohibited. So there is no conflation actually between PCP and DT and MTP Act. But what happens is in states where there is a lower sex ratio, there is more stringent law around like PCP and DT, which means doctors are also afraid to offer services because they fear like they would be like charged and they would be like booked. So then that makes it more difficult for them to have these services. But then we have to also think about like why these acts also exist. Does having sex determination or sex selective abortion. Like, what is the reason behind elimination of sex female fetuses? Does having PCP NDT, like having for so long, does it mean like we have a better gender equality? Has it worked towards that? So, but what is also happening because of all of this complexity is that abortion get demonized in these setups. So yeah, that's what happens. And of course, like how you mentioned, like, there are these also misunderstanding that like abortion is dangerous, and but then no one talks about like how dangerous childbirth is, which is like just at the later stage, right? And if we talk more about like how dangerous childbirth is, then then I doubt like if people would be more agreeable for a childbirth. But anyway, but so there are like these push around like how dangerous child abortion is, or how abortion leads to infertility, especially like if it's first conception. If it's a first conception and if you go through an abortion, then it will lead to infertility. Then you are not able to conceive, or if you, it will lead to breast cancer, for example. So all of these like myths are around there, and it also stems from the idea of like how much importance we give to motherhood, and because it's the epitome of like, like unless you're a mother, unless you have given birth, your life is a waste, is what we are taught. There's so much centrality and glorification of motherhood that yeah, like how many of us can also even relate to Prega news ads? Like it's never a good news. Like, the way that the ad shows. So for a young unmarried people, the news ads doesn't apply, but this is the level like how much glorified it is. Yeah, this is how it is.
It's a callback to something that you said initially, like how vulnerable people are most affected when it comes to accessing abortion, and queer and trans people face most amount of complications and barriers. So could you shed a little bit of light on what this process looks like for queer and trans people in South Asia, and what would inclusive affirming care look like for queer and trans people in an ideal world, if I can put it that way?
Yeah. In my research, whoever I spoke to, what I got to know is that queer people really fear going to health institutions, and it would be the last resort, say, that they would go, especially if you are a trans person, it would be the last resort that they would go to the health system, to hospitals. And it's also that queer people face like double marginalization and having a history of shadowed criminality under 377, and like you, and as a queer person, likely you have less social capital, you lack, there is less space to seeking awareness and information. So it's a big hassle to actually to point down like who is an affirming doctor who would treat you with certain dignity. And because if, and especially if you are a trans person, if like healthcare system would misgender you or would look at you as a subject of curiosity, rather than a patient who deserve care and dignity. So it's extremely difficult as a queer person to access abortion. And also like in queer setups and queer organization also, the first question even in those spaces is asked as a lesbian or a trans masculine or transgender person, why would they need abortion? This is the question that they are often asked. And also whenever there is a advocacy around queer issues, a lot of funders are also like prioritize HIV and STI prevention. So sexual and reproductive health of AFAB people gets really deprioritized. So it is never picked up. And even in abortion spaces, abortion movement spaces, like queer people are not like really talked about. So they face like a lot of challenges and invisibilization in all of these spaces. And especially like for a trans person, like abortion also causes dysphoria, and because medical health system doesn't understand queer identities, doesn't understand trans people, doesn't understand what would be like an affirming care, they are subjected to like extreme level of harassment and in fact even violence. So they don't actually like, most likely they don't, like from whoever I spoke to, like I got to know like they refuse to go to the health institute hospitals, And also, like, even if as a queer person, if you have to go to these spaces, you have to pass in a certain way. And if you are under like HRT, and then it's more difficult as a trans person to navigate this system. And like there was also one incident like which was shared with me, that trans man who was actually not related to abortion, but they were seeking services for some critical medical issue, and they had to go through an ultrasound because like they spoke to the doctor, and but the ultrasound people would be different, and he got under such panic. He refused to go through ultrasound because he realized that if he did go through ultrasound, they would get to know that he has a female reproductive organ, and it would like their privacy would be under threat. So then the NGO would have to intervene and had to like, so yeah, health system doesn't take consideration about all of these challenges that a queer person would face, a trans person would face in these setups. And like a lot of lesbian and transgender people are also in forced marital setups who also end up in pregnancy. In fact, like are forced into pregnancy as a corrective treatment, which is even more difficult that for them to seek abortion. So it's also like in abortion space, it's a really talked issue, which is, and like where people face these many level of challenges, which is very important to talk about. I don't know, like for affirmation care, like we are so far behind. If queer people are also not going for basic healthcare, then how are we even going to like reach to a point where such stigmatized, where queer people can access abortion without a fear? So I don't know. So far in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have answers to all of these, but these are questions, reflections that we can leave behind. Maybe it would spark a thought in some listener's mind. And I want to take it one step further while talking about queer and trans people, and then there are disabled people. They are also invisibilized in this space, like you talked about initially in this podcast. And even caste aware approaches are not there within the SRHR movement. The gaps that you mentioned, those are important gaps which need to be bridged. In your experience, or like through your research, if you had to share some suggestions, what are some ways in which the movement can do better in centering intersectional lived realities? There's this tussle that exists between the SRHR movement and disability movement, when it especially this bit about eugenics. And one of the things which I often think about is how it used to be Asperger's, right? And then it was changed to autism level 1, 2, 3, because that diagnosis, Asperger's, it was used to differentiate, for the lack of a better word, I don't agree with this word, but like high functioning autism, low functioning autism. People who are more disabled, they don't deserve to be in this world, but people who are, they're just quirky, weird people. Or this is how, when pop culture uses the kind of language or like portrayal, right? That is how eugenics was used, in order to segregate people and then decide who is worth living in this world and who is not. And that's why ultimately they decided to scrap that name Asperger's and give it autism level 1, 2, 3. But yeah, given these gaps that exist, these pop culture references, media portrayal that exists, according to you, how can we do better, if you had to suggest anything?
Yeah, I think like you rightly mentioned, there are these segregation. There is no need for segregation because people don't exist in a set of silo identity, right? And disability right movement have talked about care and radical, like they brought in all of these conversation, and like which else movement has strongly talked about bodily autonomy and disability rights movement. And like how can we, it would be injustice not to talk about disability in this context of abortion, which heavily decides on bodily and reproductive justice. And in a sense, like what I was also trying to say was that like people also have multiple identities, right? And so we need to like create stronger movement that looks into all of these intersection from a feminist intersectional lens when we do advocacy around abortion. And like right now, abortion, like whenever we speak about abortion, like in popular themes or whatever, it's so centered around like an upper caste, urban cis woman lens. And it's not like abortion seekers are such an homogenous group. And like if marginalized people are the one who are at the brunt of who seek, who experience so much violence, and it is hospital settings have been historically violent towards disabled population, caste, and religious minority and queer people. So like how can we miss out like voices from these community that would help you like in developing and improving healthcare system, and like they have all of these unique challenges that we can't miss out, right? So I feel as a feminist, it's also our duty, in fact, to be intersectional in these spaces and speak position and talk about these marginalized identities that faces like historically have been facing these challenges. And like you're and I, absolutely there's a lot of hesitation to engage with disability rights activists in these spaces, and it's also created through like these also like through these laws. But like even disability rights activists do speak about the question is about this separation, this exclusion that has been created through law that separates disabled people, which is completely like it's discriminatory on so many levels. Like, and if you, so I think I don't think there is a lot of difference that like disability rights activists are saying. They also like support bodily autonomy and reproductive justice. But this conversation of excluding or like eliminating certain fetuses, we need to think about why this is also happening. Like why the system and why the larger environment where we operate looks at certain bodies as the most ideal form of bodies or the desired bodies. So these conversations need to be brought out when we also speak about like reproductive justice in these contexts. But yeah, like how even trans people and disabled people, like in both of these contexts, like when we think about abortion, they see like both of these identities, like they are not imagined in parenthood or they are denied in like imagination of parenthood, not seen as sexual individuals, like with desires, and are like heavily subjected to what I was thinking of a word. But yeah, there is a lot of like cases of post hysterectomy. So like at a lot of levels, their agency is denied in all of these spaces. So it's crucial that like whenever we speak about abortion and whenever we speak about reproductive justice, we speak about bodily autonomy and agency from including these identities and voices. So yeah, I feel like it's actually like crucial and urgent as feminist practitioner that we build solidarity. And if we are not doing that, then we will keep working in silos and we will have these questions again like in say 10 years, and we will wonder like why like certain populations are left behind, and they again become like topic of say podcast or reports, and we're just like moving in circles. So it's a, but yeah, but people are living in these realities, right? So it's a huge disservice that like if in movement, if we are not talking from an intersectional lens and if we are missing out on certain communities. So yeah, and in general, even in SRHR spaces, abortion gets deprioritized. So these intersections are further like deprioritized. And like whenever we speak about abortion, like it also comes from a lens of from a concern of, oh, the maternal mortality rate is going high. So now we need to talk about abortion. So it becomes a subset of maternal health. So it's not seen as very important or crucial. Like a lot of even like feminist organizations are also hesitant to engage in abortion or work around on abortion. Or there is this thought like that if we actually like work around in contraception, then there is no need to work on abortion, which is not true. So abortion is not going anywhere. There will always be a need of abortion. So yeah, like we need to build stronger movements. Yeah.
I have some data points.
Yeah.
We are talking about intersectional realities, but even for like women or adolescents, A Foundation for Reproductive Health Services study found 32% of respondents were unaware of abortion as illegal, and 95.5% of Indian women were uninformed of the existence of the MTP Amendment Act 2021. According to Rural Health Statistics 1920, released by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in May 2021, there was a shortfall of almost 70% of gynaecologists, which severely limits women's access to safe abortions. Then 2 million adolescents lack access to contemporary abortion services. 78% abortions performed by adolescents were unsafe. And 190,000 adolescents don't even receive post-abortion care. We don't even talk about post-abortion care. And according to Guttmacher Institute, every day at least 8 women in the country die as a result of unsafe abortion-related causes, making it the third leading cause of maternal death. Yet we have anti-abortion narratives in India, like Garv Samapan versus Garvpaat. Garv Samapan is in a more positive context, you are ending it, and then Garvpaat is seen in a negative light, right? And rapidly these anti-abortion narratives are rising, and these are often disguised under we are trying to protect disability rights or we are trying to save young girls. So who is this rhetoric serving, and how do you see it impacting public policy and movement spaces?
Yeah, like these statistics that you mentioned is very stark and disturbing. As you rightly mentioned, all of these rhetorics also is built around the narrative of protectionism lens. And it also reflects that the gap in the movement itself. That's why it's also growing, right? There's a gap in the health system. There's a gap in the movement. That's why all of anti-choice anti-choice entities are also picking up on that. And there has been a slow and an impactful rise of anti-choice narrative in the country, and there have been pro-life marches that are being held annually, and they all target young people, adolescents, into these conversations. And like the first march that happened was also in 2022, and alongside that a petition was also filed challenging the MTP Act. And the focus, and I think you mentioned only like in I think at the right of beginning of the podcast that they also borrow these human rights framework to talk about abortion. And it's very similar to how even global north this is happening. And Common Health did do a study, and we got to know like there are these certain religious institutions that explicitly talk against abortion, and they also have these transnational support of funds to bolster their movement. And their argument also is around that life begins at conception and framing abortion as a violation of fetal rights. And like some of these important data that you have shared, no, the Guttmacher study, where it was very important and pivotal for pushing abortion advocacy, that 15.6 million abortion take place. They manipulate and say that 15.6 like 15.6 million murders happen, and equating it with sex selective abortion and saying like female children are being discarded. And they are also especially targeting young and adolescent population by holding these pro-life exhibitions. They also have these silicon fetuses where they ask them to hold and create emotive response towards it. And these are also very young, impressionable minds, right? So they are also trying to build a generation that would be against abortion. And some of these stances that they also pick up is co-opting these child rights movement or disability rights movement, saying instead of going through abortion, you can go through full-term pregnancy and then like a and then put the baby under adoption. So these are the kind of narratives that they bring up, and they also have these success stories of people who chose not abortion and who also brought in a disabled child. But then we have to also think about, okay, are they also selectively picking out these narratives, these stories, or also are they engaging in these disability rights movement? Or are they also engaging in child rights movement? Which the answer would be no. And they're harming young population even more because on social media, on their social media pages, there is a lot of glorification of pregnancy. And again, and essentially these movements are anti-gender, anti-queer rights, anti-disability rights. Like even there was like one session on Garbh Sanskar that held It was held by RSS women wing leaders and it was gathered by AIMS doctors, and it was around pregnancy culture values. So if you go through these pregnancy culture values, then your child will not be a trans child or queer child or a disabled child. And it's like extremely casteist in a lot of senses. It's Aryan values are being embedded. So in like in Indian context, yeah, they are extremely anti-rights to a lot of identities, and it's really impacting young people, especially if they are from like certain marginalization. And yeah, and they also like have a lot of these misinformation around abortion, around SRHR. Young people are also very confused about which to believe. So it's making it more and more difficult. And also like right now, like the current situation, political situation where there is a lot of pro-natalist push that are being made, especially in delimitation conversations. If you remember, like chief ministers were asking women to have more children so that so they have more seats in the future in the parliament. And we live in a Hindutva fascism regime, which is making a lot of like religious polarity, and like reproductive rights and everything is under threat. So under these constraints, agency and reproductive rights of individuals are under threat. They are asking like women to have produce more children, to preserve their culture, preserve to have a stronger, larger community. So under all of these things, the rights of a person is being under threat. Then again, like I'm circling back in these conversations that like we need a stronger movement which moves with a feminist intersectional lens, and we shouldn't shy away from talking about caste, disability, and queer rights when we talk about abortion and SRHR. And yeah, I think to also think about like why abortion, like why this law also exists in the first place. And we need to move towards like decriminalization where we make it a point like everyone, regardless of their identity or wherever they come from, and are not forced to disclose those reasons why they are going through an abortion services, and they get it through dignity and respect. So yeah, reproductive freedom for all. So yeah, we need to have a stronger movement. And yeah, and like exactly, we need to think of it from a healthcare as an healthcare issue, which we don't talk about it in mainstream anywhere. It's always talked about from a very political lens. And like people are like, it's like so many complexities are thrown, but we have to think about it from a very medical point of view. Like it's a medical procedure at the end of the day. Like it should be between an abortion seeker and her doctor. But then that's not how like abortion is ever looked at or ever talked about.
It's a human right. Ultimately, it's a human right, and we need to stop working in silos. This was such a rich conversation, and I'm sure this will be a great knowledge resource. Thank you so much for sharing everything and for engaging with me. It was lovely talking to you.
Thank you, Soumya. Thank you for creating these spaces.
If you are hearing this message, you have listened to the entire episode. So thanks for sticking around. You can listen to Atypical Dikkate on your choice of podcast platform. And if you want to reach out to me, your host Soumya, check out the Linktree link in the description. See ya.